to invite up the first speaker of the evening.
Look, the point of the criminal justice system is to fairly punish people once they have been found rightfully guilty through following the proper avenues of investigation. This is not something that side negating should be standing for, but they do. Okay, a few things for my speech. Firstly, some setup, then onto how we improve the criminal justice system, and then secondly on how we improve criminal rights. Okay, the setup here is like the whole purpose of these rules and these regulations around investigations is to safeguard the justice system and the criminal rights, right? Henceforth, my 2 points. I think that we need to note that this debate is going to exist on big crimes because I think that's the only real change that will occur. I don't think a judge is going to like allow you to not follow proper investigations over like a parking ticket or something. But this does include all levels of an investigation from the very start to the very end. Okay, now going on to how we improve the criminal justice system. Look, the context here is the literal point of the criminal justice system is to enforce laws. They are the only part of society which can legally do so. Okay. Our first mechanism here is under our side, we just have a lot of incentive in these investigations for them to be done properly, to follow all legal avenues and to follow all individuals' rights. Because no, it does just take a lot of time, energy and resources to investigate a crime to the point whereby someone can be found guilty, right? It is really difficult for you to get the probable cause in order to get a warrant because we can't just naturally like infringe upon someone's right to privacy because they might be a criminal, right? I will get into this more in my second point. I think the comparative here is there's a lot of incentive in these really high profile cases to solve them very rapidly, right? Therefore, this mentality of the ends justify the means does take hold in a lot of these investigators, and they just find it justifiable to break past these avenues because they think a judge is likely to grant this evidence as like permissible in court anyway because it is just such a huge scale crime. The reason why this is just so bad is I think it's kind of bad for the criminal justice system to not follow their own rules, right? How dare they enforce this on people but then not punish themselves for breaking this? What I mean here is police officers are just allowed to go break into someone's house now and infringe upon their rights, but they're not going to be punished. In fact, they're going to be rewarded by the fact that they get a court case with strong enough evidence for someone to be found guilty. We just think that this is really like bad. But then the second mechanism here is that there is just a principle this is a principle around setting the precedent that the justice system is incapable of doing its job when it follows its own rules, right? It is saying that, yes, we care about your privacy until we think there might be a crime like being committed. No, I will explain why this is like bad later on. And then the third mechanism here is overall it is just bad. Like criminal justice is just worse because you see like a lack of transparency. Which is just really bad if you don't like understand what the purpose of the investigation is. For example, now police officers can go find and take that package that was left on your doorstep and choose to interpret that in any way they want, right? Okay, what are the actual impacts here? Look, I think the impact of this principal mechanism is really important because it affects people on a very large and a small scale, and it doesn't just impact on criminals. What I mean here is now when people see that the criminal justice system is just not able to do what it is meant to do, they become really scared because they now see police officers are allowed to break laws in order to find people to be guilty. Now a mother is scared of her teenage daughter going to school because she is wearing a hijab. She might be pulled over by a police officer because they think there is a chance she is connected to whichever crime they are busy investigating because maybe she greeted this man on the street, right? We think that this is really harmful in the sense that like innocent people probably just don't deserve to be this terrified, right? Like it is just principally wrong for the justice system to go around and just victimize people because they could potentially be guilty of something bad. I think second of all, this is just counteracting like the whole point of the criminal justice system and its laws that it's got. You can't say something and then just go back on your word. This just doesn't really make sense. And then thirdly, this is just like sowing the seeds of doubt just in general in every single level of the justice system. Note, the justice system will only ever work when people have faith in its capacity to do the thing that it is set out to do. When it is quite literally going up against its own precedents and its own rules, it is just empirically not doing this. I also think that there is just a huge risk of snowballing in the sense that what will we allow next in court to be accepted when we allow our own laws to be broken, right? Like, again, this is just going to lead to breaking down the entire system. I'll take a point.
Right, don't you admit that these people who are breaking the laws by obtaining like this evidence improperly are going to get punished regardless or not? Like,
no, because if it's permissible in court, it is probably their case, right? And it just looks good if you can say, look, I've had all of these criminals' cases end up in court. And like, I just don't think it's fair, because then people won't be breaking these laws anyway. Like, I don't think that's necessarily fair to the debate. Okay, now in terms of criminal rights, like, I think inherently people just have like human rights. That's the context here. Okay, the mechanisms here is like, one of the human rights, one of the most important ones, is the right to privacy, right? The moot literally states that the only time in which evidence is like it's been obtained illegally is admissible in court is when it is necessary for the prosecution to have a case. What this means is the point at which this evidence has been obtained, they were not 100% certain or able to prove with undoubted certainty that this person has been engaging in an illegal activity in the first place. We think that this is just incredibly harmful, because once again, that just is not what the criminal justice system is about. You punish people once you can prove that they are guilty. So what if it takes 2 more months for you to catch them doing something whereby you can go then approach a judge and request a warrant and then legally search their property? We think that this is just a necessary trade-off, because you cannot go and investigate and like infringe on people's rights before they have seen a jury of their peers who then have decided they are guilty, right? That happens afterwards. They are like almost doing these things too early on. They haven't followed the proper democratic processes that we have in place within a justice system. And we think that this is necessarily what they must support for this to happen, because otherwise, like, this evidence just doesn't really matter, right? Even if you think these people have been are guilty, I think you just need to weigh this on the fact that they're human beings, and this is just really, really important for you to uphold their rights because of the snowball effect of when you do not uphold people's rights. Okay, now in the sense of bias, we think that we know that this already exists in things like the justice system, but this can only be amplified under their side of the house because this is subjective and up to individual judges. The justice system fails at the point by which it is not 100% fair and treating every individual as equal, right? This means that now a judge who just has a personal bias against a particular group of minorities is just more likely to accept certain forms of evidence within their courts, and therefore like just tolerate them being found guilty and all of these things. We think that this is like really, really harmful because of the level of like vulnerability, and this should just be weighed up really, really highly in the debate. The rest of my impacts will be brought up by my second speaker, so proud to affirm.
Let's speak for this speech and invite the first speaker of the again.
Look, you cannot assess and give people justice fairly if you don't have all the evidence and information regarding the case. 4 things to do in this speech. Firstly, on framing. Secondly, on responses. Thirdly, on the nature of the evidence. And fourthly, on how this is imperative. Firstly, then quickly on sort of the responses that we want to give. Firstly, then, even in the like best case where all these people had their privacy invaded. I think on the principle that a lot of people are now receiving justice, I think it can be outweighed, like a few people like having their privacy invaded in terms of someone who is like now their case is getting fulfilled. I think this is just a tangibly better claim. But then thirdly, on the justice system and its efficiency, it only works insofar as you are able to deliver justice and you are able to provide it. That's what we get on our side of the house. But then also on like the nuances of the justice system, they tell you that they cannot now go against what they claim to be like providing justice for. I think justice systems and courts tend to have nuances on the fact that they have discounts, etc. And like every single experience is probably a situational judgment rather than a one blanket approach. I think this should also be applied to very imperative evidence as has been provided to you via info slide. Firstly then on framing, note that a lot of my additional rebuttal will be included in this speech. Firstly then on what people are normally under defense, I think these are vulnerable people that aren't likely to have access to resources or substantial funds or capital of money to be able to invest in highly capable lawyers. These are likely to be state-funded representation or like crowd-funded, for example. These are the people that are impacted the most heavily in this debate. Firstly then, on the nature of evidence. As per info slides, it's quite intuitive that the evidence that they have is deemed to be substantial enough to be able to flip the case around if it's included in the case. Why is this important and what is this likely to look like? They've already told you that it's likely to be high extreme cases. This looks like sexual assault, violence, corporate cover-ups, murder, and like exploitation, right? Often these cases are very nuanced and have lots of information in them, and the evidence is very nuanced and hard to collate. What does this mean? The evidence that is likely presented is going to be like, it's very crucial for the evidence to be collated in a specific duration of time. If you don't have that evidence, you cannot go back and obtain it, because in the event of it, you probably aren't able to go back and contain the evidence of like the murder or the sexual assault, because that's the event that has happened. I think then courts are likely to only approve of the evidence that is explicitly very damning, right? They have the intent and capacity to be able to do so. They give you this mischaracterization that courts just have incredible biases that they're now going to act upon. I think this is untrue for a couple mechanisms, right? I think judges are highly trained. They spend years in law, expanding their skill, abilities, and degrees, but also they probably get rid of their biases by the fact that they adjourn a lot of cases on a day-by-day basis, and they like increase their reputation based on that. But also, I think a lot of courts exist within the debate, right? I think if the person feels wronged by the appeal made, they can always go to the Court of Appeal or like the Supreme Court, etc. I think one, these judges are likely to be reliable, and any sort of information that is filtered in is likely to be the most reliable information in order to present this case. But then secondly, what's going to happen to the evidence deemed improper? I think what's likely going to happen is that the evidence that is deemed improper is likely to be dismissed and not even included in the case anyway, right? So if there is a huge breach of privacy that isn't substantial to any of the evidence, I don't think it's included in the case anyway, right? So their privacy isn't so breached that it's now being used in a court system, because it's probably dismissed. I think that courts have the capacity to be able to analyze this information at the point at which, if this murder case is so huge and in all news headlines, they probably have the intent and capacity to provide the best results possible and to give the best like adjudication, right? In the case of bad actors, what's going to happen? I think if there are repetitive acts of a police officer like breaching privacy or rights, they're likely going to get huge backlash in the terms of like, one, they get fired. They probably have officers that exist above them that are able to hold them accountable. But I think even in the case of like the hijabi, which was kind of egregious, I think there are probably repercussions that exist to you. And whether if someone flags to you that this person tends to have racist tendencies and tends to only point at people with racial and has racial prejudices, this person is probably going to get fired. They're probably going to face repercussions. I don't think this exists. But also, these cases are probably on news headlines and they're like bureaucratically assessed, right? Which means they face much more stakes and much more people have an interest in them. This means that way more people hold these courts accountable, right? A lot of people are now looking into these courts and holding these people accountable, and so there's more area for reform and change, and I don't think you're having these egregious sort of evidence come through because there's just way more people holding them account, not only the judges that they want to characterize to you are going to be so biased, right? But then also, I'll take a POI before I move on.
Okay, so you're saying that the media somehow always means we get the best form of justice. Don't you think it is also true that the media itself can hold incredible amounts of bias that could also lead to cases being skewed or at least incentivize police to do further breaches of human rights?
I think we have two-step verification here. Not only are courts verifying this information, but also I don't think they understand the thesis here. The thesis is that the police officer is going to be held to account, not that the court system is going to be held account. I think that's a different mechanism on its own, right? And then just moving on to how the justice system improves further. I think firstly on lawsuits and how this is improved. I think especially in cases of vulnerable actors, they employ lawyers which have significantly less resources and they're likely to be crowdfunded or state represented. This means that in order for a lawyer to collect substantial evidence, they now have to spend extra money and resources in order to be able to do so, because they now have to file in a report or tell a police officer to be able to collect this evidence. Why is this incredibly harmful? Because it just extends and inflates the period of time which the lawsuit drags on for, right? This means that the person now has to spend more money in the lawsuit and more of their time is getting used up, right? Why is this incredibly bad? It's because not only is the person not facing repercussions in this time, but the person that, the families of the person who's likely gotten murdered now feels incredibly guilty because you know that there's evidence of some fingerprints or footprints on the house, but because it's been improperly collected, you can never be able to get that. You feel incredibly guilty if you are the parent or the family member of this person. This is when vulnerable actors are even worsely impacted. But then also on what it means to have substantial evidence, I think also then it probably takes 2 more months for you to get this evidence, as they characterized you already in this debate. But also on the comparative, what happens if immediately you have to file a report? What does the corporate now do? They probably just go back to the steps and cover up all of their mistakes, or they just drag it out even further so that the evidence and the duration is now decreased and the eligibility to be able to assess all these different events is now decreased for the courts, and it just makes them harder. What does this mean at the end of this? I think it means that even if you apply to have a request, the ability for courts to be able to efficiently judge them and give justice based on the evidence is further reduced. I think this means that you create the most worst outcomes for the most vulnerable actors in this debate. This is why you should always oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the second speaker of the appropriate team.
I'll give my speech in 3, 2. Continual undermining and misinterpretation of false aspects of criminal justice systems, all focused under taking people's rights away and intrinsically treating them as less than human before being put in front of judge, jury, nor executioner. These are all things that, despite the neg push that they get better justice, is entirely untrue, and this is their burden to bear. So a few things for you in this debate. Firstly, I'm going to go over one of the mechanisms that didn't quite come out of my first to reinstate some of our case. Then I'll move on to interacting with a first point of crash that I've identified, which is around the quality of justice. Then the second one around likelihood of poor acts in policing and in the justice system itself. And then I'll move on to my split substantive. That is a extension of my first case as to why law enforcement is still effective under our side. So real quick, one of the impacts that I think should be really highly weighed is that like the biggest impact here is the justice system becomes entirely inequitable and therefore does not do its job, right? If you take away these fundamental aspects of doing it through procedure and doing it accurately because of this procedure, they are defined to make it that way. You take away equity for people who may be accused for various reasons or have like nuances that aren't being fairly discussed. So now we're moving on to my first point of clash around quality of justice. So what do we hear first? Firstly, we're told that the system fails on our side because we can't persecute anybody, right? Like this is going to be an extra time to wait. I think this is untrue. Firstly, because it's still effective, because I think there are a really high level of resources that our justice system has. I don't think it's fair for them to characterize that we simply don't have the amount of ability to still find these people, even though they only characterize that this is 2 months, which I'll go over why this is actually not that bad. My split will extend on this, but quickly, we are able to do this. It just takes a little bit longer, and also protects people's rights, gets more accuracy, and therefore overall it is very much worth the time. Then we're told that like case nuance is lost without speed, and I think this is just a complete misinterpretation of the justice system at its core. And I say this for 3 main reasons. So firstly, forensic evidence is kept in a sterile chamber in various police stations. You can't just lose evidence. It doesn't just disappear. Cold cases can be solved up to 80 years later because they are evaluated under new types of forensic evidence, new stories and testimonies, and also testimonies are taken very, very early in a case. Literally within the first 2 to 3 days of something being discovered or something being reported, they take testimonies from the people in their lives, the people who may have been close, and all of those people, and they're stored away for as long as it takes to solve this case. Thirdly, cold cases are so incredibly unlikely. I think because of the amount of forensic evidence we have, because of the amount of understanding we have of the justice system, cold cases are like maybe 1 in 1,000. It's very likely that they're solved quite quickly, generally within like a few months of timing. So, what else do we hear here? We're told that if someone feels wronged by the justice system, they can just take it up with a higher court. Like if someone's arrested and they think that it wasn't done fairly, or if they think they were like falsely accused, they can just move up the ladder. I think this is firstly not very good to have these issues in the first place, right? I think we should avoid having these problems. But further from that, in large cases, like these things are hugely like disincentivizing. Okay, so this is because firstly, the media, like I think they're very incentivized to lie is what I mean here. And this is firstly mainly because of media pushes. It's definitely true that in big cases like rape, like murder, the media latches like heck onto these things and they will pester and ask, when have you solved it? Can I have a statement? Can I have it? This is really, really highly weighed because this alters their ability to get funding. This alters their ability to take the case seriously. And if you just then it's a huge incentive, like really dramatic, and I'll extend this in my context on my slip point, that they just toss something in the wind and go, this is what we think. And I also think that public viewing does not equal living. So, lastly on this point of clash, we're told that justice is slower, and that's like very, very upsetting for the families, right? I think this is actually true, that yeah, there will be like a slower, and this probably is a bit harmful for the families at that time, but here's why this is actually good on our side, and actually really not very great on their side. So, like, the 2 main reasons for this is that you can almost guarantee, under the right procedures, that you get the right person and you get them in a just format, that you are going to be able to testify against them, you're going to be able to get your voices out, and this person is going to be the right person. I think it's way more disheartening to have someone go to prison because they've just gotten the strongest thing they could do to solve this case fast, and then later discover that this person was falsely accused and this other person just out there. I think it's way more comforting for a family member to know with certainty. Secondly, it gets more publicity and nuance for your case, which means this person that's been harmed that you care a lot about is now an awareness martyr. And I think this is really, really great. I'll take a point before I move on.
There might not be enough evidence to prove someone, no matter how unlikely. Don't you agree?
No, I think under the amount of stuff that we have, like the levels of forensic evidence, the levels of testimony and understanding, and the like efficacy in which police can interview, I think at some point it is almost 90 to like 95% likely that something is solved. The likelihood that something goes unsolved is really, really unlikely. And here, if you like, my main reason for this is because of like how good we've gotten, but also because the media will make you. If you let a case go unsolved, they push. And under this system, it means that we have a decent amount of speed and we have a decent amount of accuracy. Now, quickly moving on to the second point of clash, on likelihood of like poor acts by the police. So firstly, we're told that police will get repercussions, and so they aren't likely to be corrupt and that courts will be held accountable. I have a few main responses here. So I think firstly, Courts can and are incentivized by quick justice, and they have the right to hide information. They have the right to not make it public, particularly in New Zealand. We don't have any law saying that we have to show the verdict of a case, that we have to show all the information outside of the jury. In fact, the jury is sworn to silence. You do not have to put out this information, which means no one has the capacity to do these things. Secondly, public releases will often side with the judiciary, which means that if anything is released, it's going to be based on what the media can get from the police, right? Lastly, police are intrinsically corrupt and have these, are intrinsically corrupt in terms of the fact that they want a verdict per the media things I've already explained. And also I think we all know that to some extent they're can be quite biased and racist. So last thing, we're told that racial stuff isn't likely for similar reasons to what they've given you for the last point that I mentioned. I think I have one response here, and that is that judges are considerably racially biased based on the fact that they have been hired under a system that has not yet included a lot of minorities or included a lot of women. So they're mostly white men who have been through the law system and have had enough respect to get voted in by their peers. Therefore, they are intrinsically quite racist. So, now onto my split around why law enforcement is still effective. So quickly some context. I think there are many high stakes cases have been closed accurately through moral and just means, such as the Christchurch shooter here in New Zealand and people like John Wayne Gacy over in America. They were solved quite quickly and with a lot of accuracy. Police are able to prosecute and are trained to be able to do these things at various levels, and they can get things like SWAT teams to come in and help, right? I also think that media is insanely aggressive with solving large scale crimes. So how does this impact us here? I think that firstly, with traditional enforcement, we see continuous accuracy of law enforcement, and this is due to the continuous efficacy because it guarantees accuracy, as I've flagged quite a few times, and law enforcement are actually able to gain a lot of notoriety and extra resources for getting large cases, and we can still use things like ethical surveillance and viewing, which is in most countries under the Bill of Rights, and also has been overseen by somebody. So you can still have this surveillance, you can still lie to them, as long as you do it with the right incentive and the right warrants. So, lastly, we're international procedures are exceedingly accurate per my previous mechanism, and it also forces prosecutors to involve themselves further in cases because they have to do more in discovery, and they have to do more to actually understand the case word for word. Lastly, media pressures will continually incentivize cases to be pushed through symmetrically, which means a similar rate of prosecution, but with more fact-checking and accuracy.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the second speaker of the negating team.
Firstly, I'd like to say that in this debate, on our side, we win if we can prove that there are substantial benefits achieved through uniquely improperly obtaining evidence, that any harm that AF claims either doesn't exist or at least has little effect after changing this idea and banning improper obtaining of evidence on their side still. And all we have to do is prove that there is at least one circumstance where this method is used in order to make real good change, in order to disprove it should never be used. Firstly, on some response that I'll later integrate. They say that police officers are just allowed to break in and they aren't punished. However, firstly, this assessment just simply isn't true. Under the status quo, police officers aren't just allowed to ethnically profile and unlawfully break into innocent people's homes without repercussions and punishment. This assessment is, first of all, just incorrect. They are countersued and convicted, they are punished. If the thing that they have done is so severe, then the affected innocent people will receive reparations and are able to countersue. This simply exists. Therefore, there isn't an incentive to police officers to just go around and recurringly and frequently break into these people or ethnically profile these people more by allowing improper obtainment of evidence. Also, the only way that they didn't be incentivized to actually go and obtain this evidence improperly is if it is vital to the prosecutor, and additionally if they are certain. They wouldn't just go and commit crimes they know they're going to be punished for. They're not invulnerable under the current system. Therefore, they don't have the incentive to do something they're not certain for. And even if they do it incorrectly and go in and harm an innocent person, they are punished. Additionally, they said that it sets a precedent of distrust within the criminal justice system and that this would cause outcry because of the use of improper obtainment of evidence. Firstly, note that they said that this debate only occurs under big cases, and we have proven that this behaviour of obtaining evidence improperly is only used when deemed necessary and certain, as people are still punished if improper methods were unnecessary. Then I think if improper evidence that is vital is used to actually convict a serial killer or a billion-dollar company, I don't think that the public will see this as distrust in part of the justice system, but in fact an effective use of the justice system, as this person has been held accountable through the use of improper obtainment of evidence. In this eventuality, this is a benefit and something that could only be achieved through the use of improper obtainment uniquely, as I will later substantiate. Again, they say that laws must be enforced and that there are rules. But laws are made to serve the people, laws change to serve the people, and it is the people that benefit most from the conviction of criminals that is only achieved through improper obtainment. Additionally, they said that intrinsically, the legal system and these police is a completely racist system. However, I don't think this is a correct characterization of the system as a whole. In fact, if there is so many racist cops globally, not just uniquely to places like America, where it's often headlines are often used to fearmonger, I don't think that it's a correct assessment that all police officers, in most cases, or the legal system is in fact just racist and biased. Again, we give you examples that these are court justices which have years and years of experience and have had years of scrutiny. There exists legislation which protect these minorities and people. Also, on their point that media latches on and scrutinizes these people, if it is just outright blatant that these people are being racist and being biased, their mechanization of the media actually works in our favor, as wouldn't it just latch onto people and expose this? Therefore, their claim that this is an intrinsically racist system that only serves to negatively impact these minorities is simply not a substantial claim. Before I develop our points, I'll accept the POI.
You claim that they're only going to be obtaining this evidence if they're absolutely certain this individual has committed this crime. How can you be absolutely certain that an individual has committed a crime prior to obtaining substantive evidence of the crime that they are illegally grabbing?
This debate isn't whether or not how they come to their assessment of it being certain. If they do deem it to be certain and they do get this evidence, it's a good thing, as it is vital and is correct and convicts the person. If it isn't, they still get punished and repercussions are still given to them. Therefore, the people harmed isn't actually significant as they suggest. I will now move on to substantiate our points. We believe improperly obtained evidence should be used in accordance to what the info slide says, based on the credible harms that arise at the larger scale. For example, let's look at larger conglomerates such as oil companies or tech companies or pharmaceutical companies. Let's say an oil spill was caused by negligence to secure methods to contain the oil, which was caused by deliberate cost cutting, and an internal statement or assessment shows that ineffective methods and insufficient methods were deliberately taken. These companies have an extreme amount of money, an extreme amount of lawyers who could argue their case and protect this evidence through just drowning lawyers in paperwork through the traditional means. In these circumstances, where say a third world country rural population who live off the land, who have had their survivalhood and home decimated by an oil spill, that piece of evidence, although improperly obtained, would A, mean those affected people get their reparations, as otherwise without improper obtainment they wouldn't, and B, it becomes a step towards making sure bad actors don't gain immunity through legal loopholes that prevent obtainment of vital evidence. Another mechanization of this is time cost. Without improperly obtained evidence, these people don't achieve their result through time inflation. They say that under their side, where improperly obtained evidence is banned, legal lawsuits will take a long time. Again, looking at just this assessment of multiple cases like this, where a rural community is decimated due to an oil spill, these communities do not have funds nor resources that can match these larger companies. No large or capable law firm is going to fight for them, as they know they won't be able to be paid for combating the best lawyers available. What does this mean? They are probably represented by a lawyer who is taking the role for strong moral incentive, but doesn't have as many resources. Through obtaining evidence improperly, say through recording, breaking in, or hacking, whatever the means may be, that vulnerable community, that lawyer, obtains evidence quicker. Now, why is this important? As through traditional means, say making requests that can be delayed or rejected, the time over which the lawsuit occurs can be inflated across months or years by sticking to proper means. This means that gaining evidence improperly literally could mean life or death for these people being removed from their homes as time continues to tick down. As lawsuits cost money, these people could be pushed out and made bankrupt as these larger companies just keep on piling paper on these lawyers, delaying the request through traditional means, and this means these people are the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged. Another mechanization of this idea of time cost is cartels, who have a substantial impact through drug trade and gun trade. Say the police see these safe houses, or a suspected safe house, they submit a request, it takes time to get a warrant, and by the time they get there, it's emptied out. The difference between millions being exploited or murdered due to addiction could be the difference of them breaking in then or now. Note that, again, that we don't think this sets a precedent for unlawful behavior, as repercussions still exist. All we have to do is prove to you that there is at least one situation where this could cause a huge beneficial impact, and it does exist. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and welcome up the third speaker from the event.
I think any kind of benefit that NEEC tries to claim when they say that they can solve a case 2 days earlier is completely outweighed by the fact that we are violating people's rights. People who are by law presumed innocent until proven guilty in order to do this. I think this is what loses in this debate. 2 points of clash in this debate. Firstly, around do we actually get better justice? And secondly, around like how does this impact the system and rights of people under our civilization? All right, firstly, so let's look at whether this actually gets us better justice. And within this point, I'd just like to look at like the bias of judges, right? Because I think we hear a lot of structural reasons as to why judges are going to be completely unbiased. I think firstly, it's worth to notice that every single person carries some sort of bias, whether it be conscious or not. I don't think that for any structural reason you can give that this kind of bias will be eliminated in judges, but let me give you a couple more reasons why we will actually get bias. I think firstly, like we have told you, but haven't really received like much rebuttal to this, is that because these judges do have to have a certain amount of experience to get to their position, they are likely to be old, they are likely to have received a lot of their training in a time that is different to now, right? I think it is just slightly more likely for an older person who grew up when times were different to have slightly different preconceived notions of people. I think secondly, because you do see a lot of cases, you might be slightly quick to jump to a conclusion if you think you have seen the same case play out 10 times in the past year and you you immediately see like the same criminal that you've been seeing several times, who you think has done the same thing, you're probably more likely to accept this evidence, which may just simply not be true, to convict them based on the fact that you think because you have experience, you are always able to make the correct call. I think you'll also, thirdly, know some loopholes. So even if you did like consciously want to make a biased decision, you are able to do so without being detected. And I think lastly, that in terms of like being able to go to different courts, I think that often the people who are most impacted in this debate are vulnerable people who will face a lot of backlash if they do, because these are serious cases and you will just be seen as like a horrible person for like denying this result. And secondly, just may not be able to because they can't like afford a lawyer or something, right? So now what do we hear about like bad actors? Because we get told that policemen will like be held accountable if they do break this law. I have three main responses to this. First of all, there are limited amounts of police officers, right? If every single police officer is doing this because we have told you they have the incentive to go and close this case, are you just gonna like put them all in jail and fire them all from their job? I just don't think this is structurally possible. I think secondly, because you actually have rewarded these police officers by telling them they've done something good, this goes on their record as another case solved. They get kudos and just like aura from doing this, right? I think this adds to their reputation. I think especially if you have a good reputation, you don't want to let this good police officer go. I think they're unlikely to face very like severe like repercussions. And I think thirdly, that even if a police officer does do something bad and they do like their bias is like very obvious, then their victim is less likely to speak out against them because they face these societal systemic pressures to not do this, to not speak out against authority. I think just quickly on the news and media, I think that if the news and media is reflective of society, they probably also carry the same bias as the rest of society, right? Whether this be like a subconscious racism that many people have, or a hotness because like the victim is just like really, really hot and like you just want them to like get their retribution or whatever, right? So we hear that there's like little incentive to do this for police officers if they're like to find this improper evidence. I think we give you a couple of reasons why they do want to, but I think that we can also say that in the cases where this does occur, police officers are likely swayed by this bias that they do have, right? Which we have established that every single person has. I think we tell you that this looks like a police officer who might just be like slightly racist without even knowing it, being more likely to invade the home of like a Māori person or of somebody who they just particularly don't like because they have like a bad feeling about them, right? I think that what this means is that the people who are more likely to be taken to court in the first place, the people more likely to end up in jail, are the vulnerable minorities that we care about in this debate. I think this means that there is an underrepresentation of the people who are most respected in society in jail. I don't think you can claim that justice is actually served, because it is not justice if the only people who get it are the vulnerable people who we like suppress and oppress in society. Alright, on people actually receiving justice, why do we still get justice under our side? Oh no, sorry, why do you get worse justice? Firstly, because we tell you, because you are not going through the checks and balances of finding proper evidence, there is no way for you to like prove that this evidence actually exists in the first place. This means that you can literally just falsify evidence if you are trying to purposefully like convict somebody who you know is innocent. This means that you can just say, oh yeah, we found this in their house when we went in without a search warrant. You cannot prove that you actually got this evidence with the correct means. And I think we still get justice. Alright, for a few reasons. Firstly, because our current tech is like evolving at such a high rate that we just are able to solve most cases pretty quickly. Secondly, we tell you that this big incentive exists either side. Like police people just want to do their jobs. I think thirdly, because we're assuming that you're so close to like finalizing this case, because if the only thing that can push you towards a conviction is this last piece of evidence, then you are just quite simply so close to solving this case that it is not likely for it to take 2 months. It is likely for it to only take 2 more days of searching. And in this time, I believe that what you can do is push a warrant through on urgency, because if you truly believe that 10 million people are going to die, or even 2 people are going to die, if you wait a second longer to go and find and like search somebody's house, then there are regulations that you can go through. You can say, I believe so strongly that this is a life or death situation. You can go and get that warrant. You can go and find justice. This is not something that just simply happens on your side of the debate. What do I think this means? I think, quite frankly, that people are willing to wait a few more days if it means that they are more likely to not miss key information. Because what you do when you rush this process is you miss the nuance. Maybe you miss one more accomplice in this murder. Maybe you miss something else that was like really important in actually getting justice. What do I think this means? I think this means, quite frankly, you just do not get better justice on your side of the house at all. Your justice is flawed. It does not represent the population fully. You are targeting the most vulnerable members of our population, and you are just simply getting bad justice. I'll take your POI.
Don't you need enough evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt?
Yeah. Alright, so now let's look, even if you do believe this, why do I think we can weigh all of that out of the debate? Although I think I've given you some pretty good reasons to believe that they actually don't get any better justice at all, right? Because we tell you to very little rebuttal. I'll deal with the material first. We hear that people will understand you violating their privacy that they care about so much for a few people getting their rights, right? I think firstly, Nick just severely underestimates how much people care about their privacy. This is one inherent thing that every single person has to themselves. You do not have your possessions. You in fact do not have most of your rights that are given to you, but privacy is such an important personal thing to every single person. When that is violated, you feel like your very essence of your soul is violated. I think people do care about privacy on such a big level. I think overall people do not want to stand for this. I think this is really important because when people feel unsafe, when they feel like a police officer can just walk into their home because there is supposed to be some sort of reason for them to be convicted of a crime, this is a very big impact. I don't think this is fair at all. I also think that when we hear that people benefit through convicting criminals, this happens on such a small scale. I've kind of already told you that I think that the privacy thing kind of just outweighs this. I think that when you want to talk about different approaches to different cases, we tell you that this all has to happen under the law for it to be fair. What Neg's entire burden to prove is that their system is unfair, that it does not target who it is supposed to, that what you are saying is that under special circumstances, judges in the criminal justice system can pick and choose who they want to target. They can pick and choose what evidence to use, and this means that you overall are not convicting who you should, and it just simply means that you are violating the actual human rights of every single person involved. It doesn't matter if you can claim a couple more murders solved, a couple more days quickly. If you are violating somebody's human rights, this is what you have to stand for. We just weigh this on the scale. It is so massive. It is so important. This is your humanity. This is who you are. I am proud to negate. Oh, oppose. No. I'm proud.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and welcome up the third speaker of the day.
The justice system exists to prove when someone is guilty or not guilty. The whole point of the justice system is to get down to what the truth is and to punish the people who have committed wrongs against society. The way evidence was obtained does not change whether someone is guilty or not. Right. The AF in this debate must prove as their burden that there is no case at all in which improperly obtaining evidence should ever be allowed. I think we tell you about unique circumstances in which they are allowed, right? You've got large pharmaceutical companies that cause extreme detriment. They might cause liver damage, debilitating injuries or even death that need to be held to account if there's not enough legal evidence. I think we've got corrupt politicians taking bribes to pass particular legislation and there's not enough evidence to prove that they've done so, or mass murderers or serial killers that manage to hide their traces because there's simply not enough evidence to obtain legally. Even sexual assault, for example, right? There isn't enough proof against the sexual assaulters to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that they have committed this crime, right? So regardless of how likely or unlikely these crimes are to occur, we say that these circumstances in which it should be allowed to improperly obtain evidence, regardless of how unlikely it may be or how much evidence there is. You need to prove in court as a burden beyond reasonable doubt. That is an extreme burden to prove, right? If you're going to put someone away in jail for the rest of their life or commit them to the death sentence, you need to be absolutely positive. And sometimes these murderers simply don't have enough evidence against them and they get away with it. The only way of getting the evidence is simply to obtain it illegally. I think that, like, the affirmative even agree here that 95% of the time there is enough evidence. But what about that 5% of the time? I think that's what the negating side really wants to argue here in this debate. That 5% is what matters here. I think that is the most significant thing that you should weigh highly. If we can put 5% more people in jail that have committed serious crimes, I think that is what matters. I think that in this mood, it means that it's not should never be allowed. I think that there is in fact a circumstance in which it should be allowed. Like, even if you don't believe the material I'm telling you now, because we haven't, like, given you enough examples or mechanized it enough, like, I'll give you, like, a story about, like, sexual assault, for example. A young woman is raped by an older male, and it becomes a dispute of her word against his word, right? That young woman has been traumatized, and there's simply not enough evidence against that man to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that he is guilty, right? This woman has no other option but to illegally obtain this evidence through, like, a microphone recorder or a video recorder in order to try get a confession from this man who raped her and sexually assaulted her, right? She has no other option to do so. She is obviously going to get punished for, like, obtaining this evidence illegally, but it simply doesn't matter because that man is guilty and did rape her. I think that we can get on our side of the house the actual benefit of even how unlikely it is that we manage to put away just a few more criminals. It far outweighs what the negating side tries to prove. Their burden is to prove that it should never be allowed, and we've just given you an example on how it could be allowed.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so I think their main push in this debate is on rights and justice, that enforcing laws is important and that we have a right to privacy. I think that we tell you, like, a few things here. That people are punished for breaking the law, regardless if, like, you're trying to obtain information improperly. And they tell us why, like, undermining the justice system is a bad thing. But I think this actually works in our favour, right? They say that judges might be racist or have inherent biases, and that's like pretty significant in this debate. I think that because they don't want to undermine the justice system, as the affirmative team have mechanised so much in this debate, that judges are simply not going to use these biases, or the police aren't simply just going to break into people's houses willy-nilly, simply because they don't want to undermine the system in which pays them, that gives them a job, that literally means that they get to enforce law and order. They don't want to undermine their own system. And I think that the affirmative saying that there is rights and justices is completely correct, right? There are rights and justices, and you do have the right to privacy. But the thing is, if you're obtaining this information illegally, you will be punished on our side of the house, but so will the person who committed the actual crime. We've already told you enough reasons why people aren't simply just going to continuously break the law. Like, not all police officers are going to just break into people's houses because they suspect that, like, this person actually did it. It's going to be in a minority of cases, and it's this minority that actually matters here in this debate. Okay.
POI?
Yes, I'll accept that POI.
Okay, alright. Don't you think that there's a difference between a woman who's been sexually assaulted getting evidence on her assaulter versus a police officer as outlined in the motion?
Right, so I still think that, like, this police officer, even if we were to take it under your framework, could still illegally obtain this information via video or, like, microphone recording. That isn't admissible, but we're saying it should. This gives justice to this woman, and the police officer will be held into account in the courts. Like, the justice system doesn't want you to say that you can take the justice into your own hands. They want you to be held accountable, as the affirmatives have said. Like, you do have a right to privacy, but this is an extenuating circumstance for the police officer, and this perpetrator actually gets punished here. So what do we actually want you to believe? I think that in order for the AF team to win this debate, they have to prove that the people that might get discriminated against judges far more vulnerable than the people who have actually committed the crimes and the victims of the people who have committed the crimes. I think that what we tell you in this debate is that the victims matter here, and the people who have committed the crimes deserve to be punished. I think that even if you believe all their material, that, like, in any case whatsoever, but 95% of the time there's enough evidence to put them away, that 5%, as they've conceded to, is what makes the debate. That 5% means that people do in fact have faith in the justice system because they know that there aren't criminals on the street, that we do actually care about the truth, not just who has the better lawyer or who can argue better. I think we give you enough examples in this debate to substantially prove that there is in fact an alternative. Like, you can't simply have a blank statement where it says, I never allow, improper evidence to be used. I think that we do in fact allow it. Even if you think that, these people, certain minorities will get discriminated on against judges, it's still outweighed by the fact that you're getting less criminals on the street. I think that, less criminals on the street weighs significantly more than some minorities that could hypothetically be discriminated against. I think this is what this debate comes down to, and I am so proud to negate. Thank you.
Let them speak for their speech and invite it, as is customary, reverse the speaking order and invite it to reply to the communicator.
When the case hinges on the fact that we all live in extremely racist societies where judges are just basing people off their ethnicities, I think that's where you lose. Two pathways to victory here. Firstly, on who gets the best justice and what rights are infringed on, and then secondly on the nature of improper evidence and the accountability measures that exist. Two steps that haven't been characterized by Neg here. We told you that firstly you get judges firstly analyzing the material and evidence that you see, right? I think they sometimes get confused with how this corresponds to in the case. I think what then happens is that you're able to decide whether this evidence is good or not, and then evaluate it within the case. But then, firstly, on the justice system and the degree to which an individual is impacted. I think this is what the average case looks like, not that someone is going to extremely just be barging into your house, right? I think the average case looks like you are walking down a street, a police officer comes up to you and they body check you. If you are not guilty, then what happens to you? You probably just walk away, right? If you are guilty, then that means that if they have the profile of a cartel leader or someone who's involved in the cartel, you probably are able to get illegal substances or weapons, and you have that evidence. Why is that incredibly important? Because I think the privacy rights infringed there aren't even that bad, right? If you are able to solve this case and impact it positively, I think you should always choose to integrate that information in. I don't think they do substantial mechanisms as to why this harm is just going to be so great that I care about it so much. I just don't think that exists, right? I think, but then on the justice, I think they tell you that it takes 2 months. They told you at first that even if it takes 2 months more, it's a better harm. This further reduces down at third to when it becomes 3-4 days. I think they fail to take into account all the information that I give you at first about how when you collect evidence, often once you have to file a report and you go through corporate, they're likely to inflate the time or just hold you back, right? But also, once you have to send in a report request through, they're likely to cover that up. That's never actually responded to. They just try to assert that these mechanisms existed in the first place, and they're likely to happen, right? But then also on the nature of improper evidence, they told you about racial biases. They told you how forensics can still be traced back. I think this is untrue at the point at which you probably require a really specialized team, that you probably require even more money as long as this case court is inflated. I think this is extremely harmful to the people that are involved in this case. If the case goes cold, the person is extremely harmed by it. But also, we told you that not only that accountability measures exist, but also that you probably have accountability not only for the police officers, but we told you at Sean about alternative methods of improper evidence that exists, which include third parties. This should be weighed, third party voice recordings. This should be weighed highly into the debate, where they can only claim the harm that maybe come from police officers. In their best case, if they have some harms that some people feel really infringed upon, I think that can be, I think I can cope with that at the point at which you're able to just have better outcomes for people, at the point at which all these cases that are all these improper evidences that are increasingly bad are just filtered out. They're likely never released to courts, and they're likely never used. At the end of this, then, on the minor thing on judges with inherent biases, it's unclear to me then why you would have correct sentencing and why you would have faith in the criminal justice system. I think you have to believe to a point that judges probably do have the experience to be able to give proper sentencing. At the point at which that fails, their whole case fails as well. Right? I don't even know why there's a point in a justice system anymore.
I'd like to stick with his speech and invite up the reply speaker from the affirming team to conclude the debate.
Quality of justice is side negating's only pathway to victory here, and I'm about to tell you why it's better on our side. 2 points of flash: quality of justice, and secondly, on the rights of people. Okay, what do they actually tell us on the quality of justice? Well, they tell us that only evidence which will be accepted will be good evidence, right? And this can be analysed by judges. Note they tell us that we apparently didn't respond to this. Go check your notes. Izzy actually did an incredible job at mechanising why judges can still have subconscious bias in the way in which they review this evidence, and even if they have the absolute best intentions, they sometimes just aren't able to make this call in a completely objective manner. And we say that this is just too big a risk for the justice system to cop. We say that inequity is just not what the justice system should stand for. We tell you that good evidence is just largely subjective. And we also tell you that these judges are likely to be older people who have led a life of decent privilege and just have some slightly older views, and how this can oftentimes alter their perspectives on what they see in a case. Why this is uniquely harmful in terms of the acceptance of evidence is we tell you that this happens in courts across the country. This is where the inequity comes from, is the fact that it is up to every single judge. Note that the material, which I believe to have been new substantive at reply on sentencing coming in, is still guidelines, right? There are just guidelines around criminal justice. I think if she can bring in new substantive, I can here too. Also, we hear from them that this needs to be proven beyond a doubt, right? And that this can be, helped by the media, which they tell us also, again, will reflect, will be reflective of the entirety of society. And we tell you that society will oftentimes just kind of agree with rulings anyway, so we don't see this as a proper mechanism to hold people to account, right? The second mechanism by which, these accounts can be, that people can be held accountable is we hear that apparently you can appeal bad cases, but they also try to tell you in the same breath that the most vulnerable actors are those who simply cannot afford lawyers. Therefore, all of their material on appealing bad sentences and on standing up for your rights as a human being just falls out because they literally just do not have the financial capacity to do so, right? Also, I would just like to note a massive point of contention in their entire case. They keep telling us down the line that police are so absolutely terrified of breaking these laws because they can get fired, they can get sued, they can lose everything they've spent their entire lives working for. I think that's the point at which they claim no benefit at all, because they will just simply never obtain this evidence in any way, shape or form because they are so absolutely terrified of doing so. Their entire case just falls out of this debate because what delta do they actually claim? None whatsoever, right? Also, we would like to tell you, and I think Lara did a pretty good job of this, in explaining, describing how we still get really good justice. justice here. First of all, we tell you that these cases just don't last as long as they try and tell you, right? If it is so absolutely dire for you to get a piece of evidence in a really short period of time, we tell you can push this through on, I can't remember what the word is, on urgency, which is just really, really good, because then all of their things on time being a factor in a criminal case, just we can claim, right? Because you can go and collect that evidence. But then secondly, we tell you that it is not so terrible for these cases to last a really long time, because it allows for the judges, it allows for the prosecution to find extra people who have been involved in this case, but also to identify levels of nuance. Therefore, the level of justice we get is better, because the understanding of the case is just so much better. So I think what this can be weighed on is the quality of justice here, and it is just really, really important. In terms of the rights of people, look, I think this is a principal point here in the fact that the justice system exists for the rights of people, and when you take their rights away, it just undermines the entire existence. But we also tell you that, or they try and tell us that people will literally sue the police for infringing their privacy, but actually we don't care if people infringe on our privacy because we understand it's for the greater good. Again, like their own case is rebutting their own case. Also, note my mechanism that I gave you on the point at which this evidence is taken, this person cannot be reasonably proven guilty. Therefore, we just win on all fronts. So, pass the frame.
I'd like to thank for this speech and all speakers for a thoroughly enjoyable debate, and back across the floor and shake hands now. Obviously, this is a silent round, so you won't be waiting around for a deliberation.
Good job, that was so fun.
Beijing, Tokyo.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Would you guys mind signing a little book? Oh, wait, yes, please. That's good. Thank you. Like, it's zero.
That is my favourite debate from this entire time. I'm dying in the corner.
The point at which you collect.